The first time I mopped the lowest sublevel, the floor hummed beneath my feet, and I thought it was the ventilation system. I had been on Orech Station for 11 days. Station time ran in 22-hour cycles, and I had not yet adjusted. I woke 2 hours early and could not sleep again, so I lay on my bunk in cell block 14 and watched the recycled air push dust along the ceiling seam until the work bell sounded. 11 days of floors, of corridor walls, of standing aside when the guards walked the lines. 11 days of learning which of the other inmates you could speak to in the meal queue and which ones you kept your eyes down around. 11 days of understanding what it meant to owe 11 years to the Colonial Corrections Authority for a crime I had not intended to commit, and a second crime, obstruction of a licensed survey operation, that I had committed quite deliberately, and which I did not regret. I had been a tomb keeper on Orech's surface for 16 years before the arrest. That work is not what it sounds like. There are no human tombs on this world. Orech is a transit world. The station hangs above it in a geostationary orbit, and below, on the surface, there are structures. That is the official word the Colonial Survey Authority used in every document I ever signed. Structures. Long, low buildings of a stone that is not stone, sitting in the gray plateau country south of the landing pads, sealed tight, and ignoring every attempt to date them by conventional means. My job had been to walk the perimeter of the largest cluster each morning, to log any changes in the surface material or the seal lines, and to ensure that no unauthorized contact was made with the outermost walls. I had loved that job. I had loved it more than I had any right to love a job that was 3/4 paperwork and 1/4 walking in cold wind. The structures, and I used the authority's word with private contempt, the way you repeat a wrong name for something just so you remember the person who named it was a fool, the structures felt patient to me. That is the only word I ever found for it. Patient, like a held breath. Like a thing that had decided, a very long time ago, that it would simply wait, and that the waiting was no burden at all. I was arrested in the 53rd week of my 16th year when I physically blocked a licensed survey team from placing resonance probes along the eastern face of the largest structure. The team leader, a man named Vasa Drint, had the permits. He had the legal standing. He had 4 security contractors with him, and I had a mop handle and 16 years of deep, unreasonable attachment to a set of sealed stone buildings that had never, by any observable measure, done anything at all. They restrained me. They placed the probes, and then something in the eastern face cracked, not broke, cracked, the way a cooling thing cracks, stress lines running through material that was under more internal pressure than anyone had known, and a sound came out of it, low and long, like a note struck on an instrument too large to see. Vasa Drint's team ran. I stood still. The crack sealed itself in 40 seconds and the probes were found 30 meters away, unfired. That was the obstruction charge. The first charge, negligent supervision leading to loss of survey equipment in a prior incident, was something I had already been managing through an appeal process that the arrest ended. 11 years. I was 51 years old when I arrived on the station. I would be 62 when I left if everything went according to the record. I had not expected Warden Selk Turan to assign me to sublevel cleaning. There were 8 sublevels beneath Orech Station's main operational floor, and most inmates never saw below level 3. The lower levels held systems infrastructure, the power distribution nodes, the water reclamation lines, the heat exchange mechanisms buried in the station's underbelly. Below those were the old sections. Orech Station had been built on top of something, the same way the surface settlement had been built near the structures. This was not uncommon in the colonial territories. You built where the ground was stable, and on Orech, the most stable ground was apparently the ground immediately surrounding these old, patient things. The lower sublevels of the station were honeycombed with passages that the original construction crews had sealed off and left to the records. Chambers, corridors, a long low room at the very bottom that the station's own documentation called the retention vault, and that no one had successfully opened since the first survey crews had attempted it, 41 years ago, before I was even born on a different world entirely. The retention vault. Warden Turan told me about it on my 11th day after the work bell, when he stopped me in the corridor outside the cell block and told me I was being assigned to sublevel cleaning duty level 8. Level 8, I said. That's what I said. The whole level. There are two of you, you and a man named Corval Mast. He does the infrastructure corridors. You do the vault approach and the vault hall itself. I looked at him. He was a compact man, Turan, with close-cut gray hair and the expression of someone who had spent too many years in a building with no windows. How many people have been assigned to the vault hall before? He paused just a fraction of a second and then said, "You're the 9th." I did not ask what had happened to the other 8. I had been in corrections long enough, even in 11 days, to understand that some questions are answered more clearly by silence than by speech. The vault hall was reached by a descent of 4 staircases and 2 locked pressure doors, each of which required Turan's personal clearance code. The infrastructure corridors that Corval Mast cleaned were lit by standard panel lighting, clean, functional, bright enough to work by. The passage that led to the vault hall had lighting too, but it was older, fixed in brackets that had been installed by the original construction crew and never updated, casting a yellowish light that was too warm for a working space and too dim for comfort. The floor was the same rubberized composite as the rest of the station's lower levels, but here someone had laid it directly over a surface that was not the station's original floor. You could see, at the edges, where the composite had been cut to fit around a border of the old material, the same knot stone I had spent 16 years walking above on the surface. The vault itself was at the end of the passage. It was not large from the outside, a set of double doors, perhaps 4 meters tall and 3 wide, set into a wall of the old material that was seamlessly, obviously not part of the station. The wall had been built around and over it. The station's construction crew had poured their composite panels right up to the edge of something they could not move and would not fit over, and simply continued on either side. The join was visible, awkward, honest. It said, "We found this here and we could not get in, and we needed to keep going, so we did." The doors themselves were smooth, not featureless. When I held my work light close, I could see that the surface was patterned, covered in a repeating geometry of intersecting lines and curves that was too regular to be decorative and too intricate to be structural in any conventional sense. The lines were incised into the material at a depth I estimated as 0.5 millimeter. They covered the entire door surface, edge to edge, corner to corner, and they were arranged. I could not say how I knew this, standing there on my first morning with a mop and a bucket in a way that was not random. There was a logic to them, a sequence. Not a picture and not a text, but something in between those two things, something that wanted looking at the way a difficult sentence wants reading, slowly, with attention, with the willingness to start over. I looked at them for 3 minutes, then I started cleaning. My assignment was the passage and the vault hall, which, I learned, meant the antechamber on the near side of the doors, a space about 15 meters long and 6 wide where the old material floor was exposed, and where decades of foot traffic from failed survey attempts had deposited a thin, persistent layer of dust, composite scrapings, dried condensation marks. And in one corner, a stack of survey equipment crates that were the property of the Colonial Survey Authority's Orach Station detachment, and that I was specifically instructed not to move. I did not move the crates, I mopped around them. And the floor on that first morning hummed. I stopped. I lifted the mop. The hum continued for approximately 4 seconds, then faded. It had not been a vibration, not a thing I felt in the soles of my feet, though I had felt that too. It had been a sound, low and resonant, with a quality I recognized from 16 years of standing in cold wind on the plateau near the largest structure. The same note, the same patience. I stood in the antechamber with my mop and my bucket, and I waited to see if it would happen again. It did not that morning. I told no one. By the end of the first month, I had established a routine. Descent at 0600, 2 hours in the antechamber, 20 minutes in the passage, back up before the morning meal. Corval Mast, who cleaned the infrastructure corridors on the same shift, was a large man from one of the outer belt settlements who had been convicted of currency falsification and who had 3 years left of a 7-year term. We walked down together and worked separately and came back up together, and that was the extent of our relationship for the first several weeks, except that one morning he stopped at the pressure door, watched me continue toward the vault passage, and said, "You're not afraid of it?" "The vault, no." He was quiet for a moment. 8 people before you walked off that assignment inside a month. 3 of them transferred to level 1 and requested administrative duties. 2 of them filed formal incident reports saying the vault had, he stopped. Filed the reports. The warden knows. Knows what? That it makes sounds, that it does things to the air, the light sometimes. He looked at me steadily. You don't find that troubling? I find it interesting, I said, and that was an honest answer, and I went down the passage to the vault hall. The sounds had become regular by the second week. Not predictable, I could not set a clock by them, but consistent in character. The hum came when I was on the near half of the antechamber floor, within roughly 8 meters of the doors. It was louder when I was close to the doors. The first time I put my hand flat on the door surface while it was sounding, I felt the vibration in my palm and up through my wrist, and I stood there with my eyes closed for a long moment, feeling it move through the bones of my hand. And I thought about the eastern face of the largest surface structure, cracking along 40 meters of wall, and the sound that had come out, and the way Voss, Adrint security contractors, had run. Nothing happened when I touched the doors that first time. The vibration continued for approximately 10 seconds and then faded. I opened my eyes. The incised geometry on the door surface looked exactly as it had always looked. I went back to mopping. 37 days in, the first glyph lit. I was not touching the doors when it happened. I was at the far end of the antechamber, working a stubborn moisture mark off the floor near the survey equipment crates, and there was a sound, not the hum, a different sound, sharper, more like a settling, like stone contracting after heat, and I looked up, and a single section of the door's incised geometry, a curved intersection near the upper right corner, was luminous. Not brightly. Pale, like something gray becoming barely blue-gray, the way early light looks on overcast rock, but it was light that had not been there before. I set down the mop. I walked to the doors. I stood in front of the lit section and looked at it, and it continued its pale blue-gray luminance for the duration of my looking and did not fade while I stood there. When I stepped back 3 paces, it faded. When I stepped forward again, it returned. I put my hand on it. It was warm, not hot, warm, the warmth of a surface that has been in sunlight, though there was no sunlight here. The geometry under my fingers was fine and exact, 0.5 millimeter incised, and every line carried the warmth equally, as if the warmth was not in the surface but in the lines themselves. I stayed for 40 minutes that morning with my hand on that section of the door and my eyes on the lit geometry, and my mind as quiet as I could hold it. And then I picked up my mop and went back up. That evening I filed my daily cleaning report, noting no equipment irregularities and no structural anomalies, and I did not write what I had seen or what I had felt, and I did not sleep well, and I did not care. I had learned in 16 years on the plateau that patience is a practice. You do not wait for something by holding your breath or watching the clock. You wait for it by doing the next small thing, writing the log, walking the perimeter, taking careful account of what is in front of you, and by keeping your attention distributed and light rather than fixed and heavy. Heavy attention, I had learned, frightens things. Light attention, sustained, is an invitation. I went back the next morning. The glyph lit again when I approached. Two sections now, the one from the day before, and a second one, adjacent to it, the same pale blue-gray, the same warmth under the fingers. I touched them both. The sound when I touched the second one was different from the sound when I touched the first, not a hum now, something lighter, higher, a resonance rather than a drone. 3 sections lit on the fourth morning. I spent 10 minutes on each of them. I was 3 hours in the antechamber that day, and Corval Mast was waiting at the pressure door when I came back up, and he looked at me and said nothing, and I said, I was thorough. He continued to say nothing. 5 sections by the end of the first week of that development. 8 by the end of the second. I noticed that the sections did not light in a random scatter across the door surface. They traced a path, a slow outward expansion from the first point of illumination, following the logic of the incised geometry, as if the geometry was a map of exactly what sequence things should happen in. I began to think of it less as a door and more as a question. A very long question, being asked one clause at a time, with the patience of something that had been asking the same question for a very long time and was in no hurry about the answer. I was not in a hurry either. By the end of the 6th week, others had begun to notice. The station's structural vibration log was accessible to the facilities management staff, who were not inmates but free contract workers employed by the Colonial Corrections Authority on rotating 18-month postings. The facilities manager for Level 8 and below was a woman named Hester Rond, who had been on Orech Station for 11 of those months, and who had in that time filed exactly 0 vibration event reports because there had been nothing to file. When the log started returning low-level events every morning between 0600 and 0800, events that corresponded precisely to my cleaning shift, she filed a query with the warden's office. Tyran told her it was the water reclamation lines. I know this because Corval Mast knew the facility's staff better than I did. He was 3 years into his sentence, and had the kind of informal knowledge that inmates accumulate about the people who run the infrastructure around them. And he told me over the evening meal one day, with the particular casualness of a man delivering information he is not sure how to categorize, that Hester Rond had told him the vibration signature from Level 8 looked nothing like a water reclamation line, and that she was going to run a secondary diagnostic regardless of what the warden's office said. She ran the diagnostic. The diagnostic found nothing wrong with the water reclamation system. She filed a second query. Tyran told her it was settling in the composite floor joints around the old material sections. Hester Rond, I was told, responded to this explanation with the specific silence of a technically trained person who knows they are being managed and has decided to let it go for now. The vibration log continued to return its morning events. I continued to go down at 0600. The sections continued to light in their patient sequence. There was a morning in the 7th week when I arrived at the antechamber to find that someone else had been there before me, not recently, but in the past day. The survey equipment crates had been moved slightly, shifted perhaps 30 centimeters from their usual position, and there was a fine powder residue on the floor near the door that I recognized as the material used in portable resonance probe housings. Someone had set up a probe, run a scan, and taken the probe away. The floor in front of the door was unmarked. Whatever scan had been run, the vault had not responded to it. The geometry was dark and silent and patient in exactly the way it was always dark and silent and patient when I was not in the room. I cleaned up the probe residue. I put the crates back where they belonged. And when I stood in front of the door and put my hands on it that morning, the sequence lit faster than it ever had before, as if the vault was eager. In the minimal way that something patient can be eager to demonstrate the contrast. 41 sections by the time both palms were flat on the surface. A new record. I thought, not for the first time, that the vault was not simply reacting to me. It was communicating. It was making an argument, the way something makes an argument when it has evidence to present and a witness willing to receive it. By the end of the second month, Warden Turan came down himself. He came without notice. I heard the pressure doors cycling, which they did not normally do during working hours, and I straightened up from where I was crouched beside the lower left quadrant of the door, where a particularly fine section of the geometry had lit that morning, and I had been working through its shape with the tip of one finger, following each line as carefully as I would have followed a sentence I wanted to understand rather than merely read. I straightened up and turned around, and Turan was standing at the entrance to the antechamber, with 2 guards behind him and his hands folded at his waist, and his expression doing the thing it always did, giving nothing away, or giving the impression of giving nothing away, which in my experience is a different thing. He looked at the door, then he looked at me. "How many sections?" he said. "This morning, 31 at the peak of it. Some of them fade when I'm not in contact." "At the peak of it," he repeated. "They come on as I approach, and more of them come on as I work. The pattern expands. The contact points are warm." He was quiet for a moment. "The 8 people before you, the ones who filed incident reports. You said they described sounds and light." "They described feeling threatened," Turan said. "They described the sounds as aggressive. One of them said the floor moved. 2 of them reported that the lit sections moved toward them in a manner they characterized as," he paused, "as pursuit." I looked at the door. 31 sections, most of them still faintly luminous, the path of them curving across the surface in the sequence I had come to know the way you know a route you walk daily. "It hasn't felt like that to me," I said. "I know," he said. "That's why you're still here." He looked at me steadily for a moment. "I reviewed your file again last night, Orvis. You were a tomb keeper on the surface." "For 16 years, yes." "The structure's down there." He did not gesture, but the word had a weight that gestured for him. "The ones these," and he indicated the door and its geometry and the old material wall around it, "are presumably connected to." "Presumably," I said. "In 16 years, did you ever—" He stopped, started again. "Did it ever do anything for you on the surface?" I thought about the morning of Voss Adrint's survey team. I thought about the 40-meter crack and the sound that came out and the probes found 30 meters away unfired. I thought about how I had stood there when everyone else ran, and how the crack had sealed itself while I was standing there, and how that detail had been in the incident report, and how it had apparently not connected to anything in anyone's mind except mine. "Not in any way I could prove to a licensed survey authority," I said. Turan looked at me for another long moment. Then he turned and walked back up the passage without another word, and the pressure doors cycled behind him, and I turned back to the door and crouched down and put my finger back on the fine line section in the lower left quadrant, and it lit immediately, warmer than before, and the resonance it made was almost a voice. I said quietly to the empty antechamber and the patient doors, "I know, I'm working on it." The 31st section was the last to light for 3 full days after Turan's visit. I came down each morning, and the 31 sections lit as I approached and held their luminance while I was in contact, and that was all. No expansion. As if the question had paused mid-sentence, waiting to see whether the conditions were still right. On the 4th day, Corval Mass came with me all the way to the antechamber entrance. He stood there while I worked. He said nothing. The sections lit as they always did, and on that morning a 30-second section illuminated, not adjacent to the existing cluster, but at the center of the door in a space that the geometry seemed to have been building toward, a focal point I had been watching gather significance for weeks. When the 30-second section lit, the sound in the antechamber changed. It stopped being a collection of individual resonances from individual sections and became a single thing, a chord, a convergence, something that came up through the floor and through the old material wall and through the door itself, and filled the antechamber from every surface simultaneously. It was the loudest thing I had heard in that space, and it was not loud at all. It was the loudness of something very large holding very still. I heard Corval Mast breathe in sharply at the entrance. The 30-second section held its light for approximately 2 minutes. Then it faded. Then all 31 sections faded in sequence, fastest to last, in the reverse order in which they had first appeared, weeks ago, beginning with this one. And the antechamber was as it had been on my first morning, plain, dim, dusty, quiet. I stood in front of the dark door for a long time. Then I went up and ate my meal, and spent the afternoon on corridor assignment on level 2, and said nothing to anyone. That night, lying awake in cell block 14, I thought about what my mother had told me when I was young. When I was perhaps 8 or 9, young enough that the telling had the quality of a story rather than a history, though she had always insisted it was both. She had told me that our family name, Orvis, from the old colonial standard that her grandmother's grandmother had carried forward from an even older one I could no longer find records for, had once been a functional word rather than merely a surname. A title, she said, or the closest thing in the old tongue to a title. She could not tell me what it had meant precisely because the documentation had not survived. What had survived was the name itself, passed down through 8 generations of women and men who had served in one capacity or another as caretakers. Not of any one specific thing, caretakers in general, keepers of thresholds, she had said with the smile of someone who finds family lore charming and slightly embarrassing in equal measure. Keepers of old places. It's in the name. Can you hear it? I had not heard it then. I was 8 years old. It had sounded like something you told children when you wanted them to feel that belonging to an ordinary family was secretly important. I heard it now, lying on my bunk at 2 in the morning by station time, with the 41 years of failed access attempts and the 8 cleaning staff who had filed incident reports, and the 32 sections of incised geometry lighting in sequence over the course of 2 months, all arranged in the quiet of my mind. I heard it. I did not sleep after that. I went down at 0400. I had never gone down that early. I did not wait for Corval Mast or for the work bell. I took my car to the pressure door and cycled through alone and walked the passage in the old bracket light with my footsteps the only sound in the station's lower body, and I arrived at the antechamber, and I did not take up the mop. I walked to the door. I stood in front of it, and I put both hands flat on its surface, directly over the center section, the 30-second one, the focal point, and I closed my eyes and I said, not loudly, not performing it for anyone, just saying it the way you say a thing you believe to be true. I'm here. I've always been here. I didn't know what I was doing, but I was here. The 32 sections lit. All of them simultaneously, without the usual sequential unfolding, all at once, the way a held breath releases. And then sections 33 through 60 lit. New ones I had never seen before, racing outward from the focal point in a cascade that covered the remaining dark geometry of both doors in the space of perhaps 10 seconds. And the antechamber was flooded with blue-gray light that was no longer pale or faint, but clear and steady and deep. And the sound the doors made was no longer a resonance or a chord or a note. It was a voice. Not a human voice, not a sound shaped by a throat or lips or breath, a sound that had been shaped by something very old for a very long time and that had learned over that time exactly what it needed to say and exactly how long to hold each syllable so the weight of it arrived correctly. I felt it in my sternum. I felt it in the backs of my hands, still pressed to the door. I felt it in the bones of my face. The sound was words. I did not understand the words, they were in no language I had ever studied, but I understood their shape, the way you can understand the shape of a sentence in an unfamiliar language if the speaker is patient and the syntax is clear. And the shape was, I have been waiting. This is the place I held. You are the one I held it for. I stayed where I was, both hands on the door, both eyes closed, and the light poured through my eyelids in blue-gray waves, and I thought, 62 sections. There had been 31 fixed sections and a 30-second focal point and now 60 sections more. I had not counted quickly enough. I tried to count from memory and could not. There had been too many, too fast, and my mind had not been in a counting state. My mind had been in a receiving state. The light faded over approximately 30 seconds. The sound fell with it, diminishing in the way that a chord diminishes when the last sustain of the instrument runs out, not cut off, not interrupted, simply completed. The door was dark again. The antechamber was quiet. My hands were still warm. I stood there for a while. Then I took up the mop and cleaned the floor, because the floor still needed cleaning, and because doing the next small thing was the practice I had built my adult life around, and it seemed important not to abandon the practice just because something had happened. I filed my daily report and noted no equipment irregularities and no structural anomalies. Warden Turan came down that afternoon, alone this time, without the guards. He stood at the antechamber entrance and watched me finish the last section of floor and wring out the mop and set it against the wall, and then he said, "Level 8 has a security camera in the passage. It recorded the light this morning." I nodded. 4:17 a.m., he said. "You were not on scheduled shift." "No." He was quiet for a moment. "Orvis, what happened this morning?" I put my hands on the door, and it responded more completely than it had before. The camera recorded the light for 48 seconds. That matches my recollection. And the sound. The microphone in the passage picked it up. The microphone on level 5 picked it up. He said that carefully, as if calibrating how much weight each word should carry. And the one on level 3. And the station's structural vibration sensors logged an event of 2.4 on the internal scale, which is the threshold that triggers an automated report to the Colonial Survey Authority. I looked at him. "They'll send someone," he said. "They always send someone when the vault triggers a structural event. They've sent people 17 times in 41 years. They'll examine what the sensors logged. They'll file a report. They'll attempt their own access protocols." He paused. "And the vault will do what it has always done for everyone who isn't you, Orvis." "Which is nothing," I said. "Which is nothing." He looked at the door for a moment. "The 8 people before you who filed incident reports, none of them described what you described. None of them used the word patient. They used the words threatening and pursuing and aggressive. 2 of them reported nightmares. One of them reported that the lit sections had formed a shape on the door that he described as a face." He stopped, started again. "The camera has never recorded light like this morning. In 41 years of recording and 17 Survey Authority attempts, the camera has recorded low-level illumination events on 3 occasions. What it recorded this morning covered both doors completely." I thought about what both of us were not quite saying, and decided to say it. "You think the vault behaves differently with me than it has with anyone else?" "I think the camera and the structural sensors think so, yes." He looked at me with the eyes of a man who had spent 20 years managing a facility he had never entirely understood. "What do you think?" "I think it's been asking a question for a very long time," I said. "And this morning it got far enough into the asking to feel confident it was going to get the answer it was looking for." Turan was quiet for a long moment. Then, "The Colonial Survey Authority will be here in 6 days." "I know. They'll want access to level 8. They may want to interview you." "I understand." He looked at me steadily. "You've been on this station for just over 2 months, Orvis. You're assigned here for 11 years. In those 11 years, you will have routine access to this level that no licensed survey team has. You will be here every morning at 0600 and the vault will be 11 meters away." He paused. "I am not telling you anything. I am simply describing the situation." "I understand the situation, Warden." He nodded once slowly and turned and walked back up the passage, and I waited until the pressure doors had cycled twice. Once for him going up and once for the automatic reset, and then I turned back to the door. 6 days, I said to it. "They'll come and try their procedures and nothing will happen, and then they'll leave and I'll still be here." The door said nothing. It was very good at that. 16 years on the surface had taught me to read that particular silence correctly. It was not absence, it was patience. It was the held breath of something that had already decided how this was going to go and was simply allowing the remaining time to pass. The Colonial Survey Authority's team arrived on the 5th day rather than the 6th, early, efficient, unannounced in the usual sense but anticipated by the station's standard protocols, which had been logging their transit authorization since the structural event report went out. There were 4 of them: a lead surveyor named Pretha Lunn, a materials analyst, a linguist who wore an expression of permanent mild anxiety, and a security technician who carried enough portable equipment to conduct a full-scale resonance survey without external support. I knew Pretha Lunn by reputation. He had been the Colonial Survey Authority's primary specialist on Orach anomalous structures for 14 years. He had, in that time, attempted access to the surface structures on 49 separate occasions using 49 distinct methodologies, and he had been on 7 of the 17 vault access attempts that the station's records documented. He was a careful, serious man who had devoted most of his professional life to something that had refused him every time, and he carried that refusal the way some men carry a long grief, not with self-pity, but with the particular heaviness of something you have not been able to put down. He arrived at level 8 on the 2nd day of his team's presence on the station. Warden Turan brought him. I was in the antechamber when they arrived. I had come down at the standard time, and I was at the far end of the room near the survey equipment crates when I heard the pressure doors cycle. I did not stop working. I kept the mop moving and kept my eyes down, which is a habit that prison installs quickly and thoroughly, and I heard Turan say, "That's Daniel Orvis. He's the cleaning detail for this level," and I heard Pretha Lunn say nothing in response to that for a moment, and then say, "How long has he been assigned here?" 8 weeks. The structural event on day 53 of his assignment. Yes. His file. He was a surface tombkeeper, 16 years. A pause, the obstruction incident. He physically blocked the Adrint survey. Yes. And the eastern face fracture event. He was present, yes. He was the only person present who didn't run. Another pause, longer. I kept mopping. I was at the furthest possible point from the doors and I heard, behind me, the soft sound of both men approaching the vault entrance and stopping. Pretha Lunn stood in front of the doors for a very long time. I know this because I worked my way slowly back across the floor, and he was still standing there when I was within 6 meters of the doors and the first section lit, pale blue-gray, and I heard him draw in a breath. "That section," he said, "has been recorded on camera twice in 14 years, both times in the presence of multiple people, survey teams. It was faint, 2 to 3 second duration." I did not say anything. A second section lit, then a third. The cord was building, the way it always built when I came close, not a rush, a patient accumulation, each section adding its own note to the convergence. "In 14 years, Pretha Lunn said quietly, I have never seen more than 4 sections illuminate. The camera record from day 53 of this man's assignment. He was speaking to Turan, not to me, but the words were addressed to the door and the door knew it, shows complete illumination. Both doors, every section, for 48 seconds. I was 5 meters from the door now, 12 sections lit. I heard Pretha Lunn move one step, toward the door and felt without looking the quality of attention he brought to that step, the 14 years of careful, grieving concentration behind it. And I heard the sound change. Not stop. Change. Not the chord I had come to know, but something sharper, something with an edge that the chord had never had, something that was still patient but was also, unmistakably, selective. 3 sections went dark. Pretha Lunn took a step back without appearing to mean to. The materials analyst and the linguist and the security technician, who had followed their team lead into the antechamber and were standing against the side wall with the survey equipment crates, went very still. The linguist had a recording device running. I could see its status light from where I stood, and I watched her forget entirely that she was holding it, her hand dropping to her side as the device continued to record whatever it would find useful to record. I stopped. I stood still at 5 meters and I did not move, and I said quietly to the door, "He's all right. He's worked here 14 years. He cares about this." The 3 sections relit. The edge went out of the sound. I heard Prethalun's breath behind me, ragged and unprofessional and entirely human, and I finished crossing the 5 meters and put both hands on the door, and all 62 sections lit at once, the way they had on the morning at 4:17, the full door light flooding the antechamber in blue-gray clarity, and the cord rose to the thing it had been building toward since the first morning I had mopped this floor and felt the hum beneath my feet. Prethalun made a sound, not words, a sound. I stood with both hands on the door and the light pouring through my closed eyelids, and the cord moving through the bones of my hands and my wrists and my arms, and I waited. The center section, the 32nd, the focal point, brightened past blue-gray into something that had no good color name, something that was violet but not purple, white but not pale, the color of an old promise held long enough to develop its own light. The other 61 sections held their blue-gray steady, and the center one brightened to that nameless color, and the cord shifted to accommodate it, and then the sound changed again, fully, completely, from resonance to voice, from voice to words, and this time I understood them. Not in my ears, in somewhere further back than my ears, in the same place where, at 8 years old, I had almost understood what my mother was trying to tell me about an old word passed down through 8 generations. In the place where you receive a thing that has been waiting to be received for long enough that the receiver and the waiting have shaped themselves to each other without knowing. The vault said, "You were never the prisoner here." And then it said my name, not Danel, not Orvis, but the thing my name was the last surviving echo of, the word that had been a title and then a surname and then nothing but a sound carried forward by people who no longer knew what they were carrying. The original word. I could not have repeated it. I could not have written it down. But I understood it completely, the way you understand the word for home in a language you have never been taught. And then it said, "Keeper." The light did not go down this time. I stood there with my hands on the warm door in the clear blue-gray light, and I felt, rather than heard, the locks in the door disengaging, not one lock, not 2 locks, but a sequence of them, deep in the door's material, old mechanisms turning over in their housings for the first time in a span of years I could not estimate and did not need to. I felt the door ready itself to open. Not opening, not yet. Ready. Waiting, as it had always waited, but for the first time waiting for something that was here rather than something that was still to come. I took my hands off the door. I turned around. Prethalun was standing 4 meters behind me with his back against the far wall, and his face doing something I had no ready name for. He was a man who had spent 14 years being refused by this place, and his face was not angry or resentful, and it was not relieved in the ordinary way of a man who has been proven right about something he always believed. It was something plainer than that. Something that looked like the expression you wear when a thing you have loved for a long time, and loved without hope, finally turns and acknowledges you in the one way you always knew was possible and never expected to see. He was looking past me, at the light on the door, at the 62 sections still glowing, steady and clear. "What did it say?" he asked, and his voice was very even for a man whose face was doing what his face was doing. "It said I was never the prisoner," I told him. "It said the name my family's been carrying since before anyone could remember what it meant, and it called me Keeper." He was quiet for a long time. The light held. The door held its readiness the way it had held everything else, patiently, without urgency, knowing exactly how much time was available and choosing not to hurry any of it. "Keeper," Prethalun said. "That's the word, yes. In the old tongue, the one the linguists have been trying to decode from the surface inscriptions for 40 years, there's a root form, We've identified it in 11 separate inscription sets. We've never known what it meant. The derivation matrix kept returning cognates in 3 different functional categories: custodian, threshold, and the verb to hold open. He looked at me. We couldn't decide which it was. We thought it had to be one. It's all 3, I said. He nodded slowly, as if he had suspected that and was now receiving confirmation rather than information. And the name, the one it used. It's where Orvis comes from, I said. 8 generations back at least, maybe more. The documentation doesn't go further than that. He looked at the door again. The light was as steady as it had been since the moment the vault spoke. Not fatting, not brightening, simply holding, the way something holds when it has done what it needed to do and is now waiting for the next step at whatever pace the next step requires. "Will it open?" he asked. "When I ask it to," I said, "not before." I watched his face process that. I watched him arrive at the understanding that 14 years of careful, devoted, expert work had been not wrong, not wasted, simply insufficient in exactly the way that a key is insufficient when what the lock needs is something older than the concept of a key. He had done everything right. He had brought the right equipment and the right questions and the right quality of care. He had simply not been the one the door was holding open for, and there was nothing in the universe that could substitute for that, and he had known it, I suspected, for most of those 14 years, and had kept trying anyway, because that is what it looks like when someone loves a thing truly. "There's no urgency," I said. "It's been waiting this long." "No," he agreed. "No urgency." He looked at me. "How long have you known that it was that you were?" "Last night," I said, fully. "Before that I had pieces of it, the way you have pieces of something before it assembles." I paused. "I think it's been knowing on its end for longer than that. I think it recognized something when I first touched the door. I think it's been patient because it had to learn how to speak to me in a way I could receive. It had the language. I didn't." Pretha Lund considered this for a long moment. Then he said, carefully, "You have 11 years on this station." "I do." "Whatever is behind those doors, whatever the vault is holding, it has been sealed for at least several thousand years, possibly considerably longer. Whatever is in there has been there all that time." He paused. "It's not going anywhere." "No," I said, "it's not." "And neither," he said slowly, "are you, for the next 11 years." "No," I said, "neither am I." We stood in the antechamber in the blue-gray light, the two of us, on either side of the understanding that had just arranged itself between us. Pretha Lund and I were very different men who had arrived at this door by very different roads, and what we shared was something that I suspect is rare enough that most people go their entire lives without sharing it. We had both loved this place without being able to say why. He had loved it from the outside, with the love of the investigator and the scholar, the love that circles and studies and never stops asking. I had loved it from the boundary line, with the love of the keeper, the love that stands between and holds and does not require an answer to be sustained. The door had known the difference. The door had always known the difference. I turned back to it. I put my left hand on the center section, the focal point, the 32nd, the one that had lit first on the morning of my 37th day, and I felt its warmth and its readiness and its long patience. And I said not to Pretha Lund and not to the door exactly, but to the thing behind the door that had built this place and sealed it and walked away and trusted that eventually the right person would come. "I hear you. I'm here. We'll take it slowly." The center section's color shifted, the nameless one, the not violet, not white, and held for 3 seconds, and then returned to blue-gray along with all the others. And the sound made one final note, clean and complete, like a period at the end of a sentence that has been a very long time arriving. Then the antechamber was quiet. The light on the door did not go out. It held at its steady blue-gray. I understood that it was not going to go out, not because the vault was performing for anyone, not because it was displaying anything, but because this was simply its natural state now that the right person had come. The light was not a show. It was a door being what a door is when the one it was built for is finally standing in front of it. I picked up my mop. I could hear Pratha Lund behind me, the sound of him not saying anything, which was a very full silence. After a moment he said, "I'll need to file a report." "Of course. The authority will want to document this. The complete illumination event, the acoustic record, the what you described hearing." A pause. The locks disengaging. "You heard them." "I felt them, through the floor." He paused again. "The structural vibration sensors will have logged another event." "Yes. They'll send more people." "They will," I said. "And the door will be lit when they arrive, and it will be lit when they leave, and it will be lit every morning when I come down at 0600 for the next 11 years. I began working the mop across the floor in the even strokes I had learned over 2 months of daily practice. And when I've served my sentence and walked out of this station as a free man, I expect I'll find a way to come back. I expect the vault will still be here." "The authority may not wait 11 years, Pratha Lund said. They may seek to reclassify your sentence. There are provisions for that in cases of significant archaeological relevance." He said this carefully, as if presenting a document he had prepared but was uncertain of the protocol for delivering. I stopped mopping. I turned and looked at him, at this man who had spent 14 careful years on the other side of a door that had just, in my presence, done what it had never done for him, and who was now offering me the thing he had spent those years trying to reach, not because he could use it, but because he recognized that I was the one who should have it. "I appreciate that," I said. "I'll make the case," he said simply, "for what it's worth." He left shortly after. Warden Turan came and went without speaking. Corval Mast was at the pressure door when I came back up, and he took one look at my face and said, "The floor, when I was in the passage, I felt something. Through my boots, a vibration, like the whole station breathed." "That's an apt description," I said. He looked at me for a long moment. "What are you?" he said, not unkindly, just the question. I thought about my mother's voice. I thought about 8 generations of people carrying a word they could no longer define, passing it forward anyway, the way you pass forward a key when you no longer remember what door it opens. I thought about 16 years on a cold plateau, and one morning when the stone cracked and made a sound like a note struck on an instrument too large to see. I thought about 0400 in an antechamber with both hands on a door saying, "I'm here. I've always been here." "I'm a keeper," I said. "I just didn't know which door." The light was still on when I went back down the next morning, and the morning after that. It was on the morning after Pratha Lund filed his report, and on the morning the authorities' second team arrived, and on the morning they left. It was on the morning my sentence was formally reviewed, 7 months after the vault spoke, when Pratha Lund's case, made carefully, patiently, with 14 years of documentation behind it, succeeded. I walked out of Orech Station on a cold morning in the 244th day of my incarceration. The station hung above the surface, and the surface lay below it in its gray plateau country, and somewhere in the southern structures, 11 years of waiting had been returned to me. I did not go back up to the station. I went down to the surface. I walked the perimeter of the largest structure the way I had walked it for 16 years, in cold wind in the morning. And when I reached the eastern face, the face that had cracked and sealed and sent Voss, Adrint security contractors running, I stopped and put my hand on the old knot stone, and it was warm, and it had been warm for exactly as long as I had been standing in that antechamber every morning, and I understood that the structures and the vault were the same thing, had always been the same thing, built by the same patient intelligence for the same patient purpose, and that the purpose had always been this: to hold open a door for the person the door was meant for. That was what a keeper was, not a guardian of the outside, a guardian of the threshold, the one who holds the door open from the other side so that the right person, when they finally arrive, finds it already partway through its opening. I stood on the plateau in the cold morning wind, hand on the warm stone, and I understood for the first time why my family had never stopped carrying the name. Not because they knew what it meant, because something in the carrying of it, generation after generation, had kept the door from closing all the way. The stone hummed under my hand. I closed my eyes. I said to whatever waited behind every threshold I had not yet crossed, I know I'm here. And for the first time in a very long life spent standing at the edges of things, that was enough.